And warmer from the low, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 by Ryan McIntyre, who does great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. We're going to be chatting with him about what we've all seen with Memphis, and I wanted to get him aboard to be able to talk a little bit about this topic because I have been talking about it the last week or so, but he was a coach on that South Carolina team that made the Final Four many years ago. He was a part of Bob Huggins' staff as well, and I want to just get his thoughts on how everything that has happened at Memphis over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, with them canning 4 staff members, with them canning 8 staff members in total here in the offseason, really does impact the team, and just sort of a little bit of a coach's eye as to what might be going wrong for Memphis this year. We're going to talk about the landscape of the American Conference. We're also going to be talking a little bit about this as well, and I'm going to bring it up here in the first segment since this is a piece of news that dropped very late on Wednesday after I had already recorded my podcast, but the Pac-2 going from the Pac-6. Why this is, obviously, if you're a college sports fan, something that is very big, but not going to be something that impacts your betting just yet. Might a little bit down the line in like the 2025-26 season, it might impact your betting. Why it's probably not going to be doing so this year, though. So I'm going to expand a little bit upon that in a minute as well, but we're going to be touching upon that as well, and then just a few teams that he's feeling bullish and bearish on as well, and just how some of these coaches that are doing a slow rebuild can be a little bit slept upon and provide you a little bit of value as well. So, nice, well-rounded podcast today, and if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we all fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Juden_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please send these into the timeline. The other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast, find that 5-star review, and we'll start off with the first things first sort of ordeal, with the Pac-2 becoming the Pac-6, as Washington State and Oregon State, they are going to be competing in the WCC for the next few years, and that's not going to change. We could maybe, in theory, see a way where they get that 2-year agreement down to a 1-year agreement, but it's looking like they're going to be set for those 2 years, and then from there, it's anyone's guess as to what's going to be happening, but Boise State, Colorado State, Fresno State, and San Diego State, they are poised to join what is currently the 2-pack and form the 6-pack, which I think is very fitting because that's about the amount of people that were able to access the Pac-12 network over the last decade, so I guess that they were giving a little bit of ode there, but the big reason why this just does not impact your betting at all as of right now is because these two teams that are still battling out there in the Mountain West, games have already been set for most of these teams in terms of non-conference for this upcoming season. I know that our good friend Rocco Miller has been very hard at work on that, and for San Diego State, they certainly are going to be able to elevate this conference, but now it becomes a question as well because you need really 8 teams to be a qualifying conference is who comes next. Then you might be seeing a little bit more impact. Then you might be seeing some brouhahas bust out, and certainly some of these Mountain West teams that are perhaps left in the dust, they might have a little animosity, and if the Mountain West, because right now with the moves that are going to be made, they are going to be down to 8 teams. If they remain intact, if the Mountain West still has those 8 teams, they might try to take it out on San Diego State during the 2025-26 season. Because nothing is imminent, I don't think that there's going to be really any bad blood this year. I don't think that there's going to be the conference trying to levy against these teams to not be able to play in the postseason tournament, which we've seen from time to time. Like when James Madison was leaving the CAA, they were barred from the CAA tournament, and now they have been able to bust out. They've been able to have a very good run of things over the last few years in the Sun Belt. We saw them try to do something similar in the Rising Leg with UIC as well, but that was something where UIC was still able to partake in that conference tournament. So sometimes the conference will try to put through some hoops with regards to these teams, but I mean, what happens with the Mountain West, that is a big question, because if you see other teams jump ship, like if Air Force goes on over to the American, where you've got Army and Navy football already there, then you've got a just big giant breakdown, and if everyone's leaving, like we saw with the Pac-12 last year, it was business as usual as the conference was completely deteriorating, because it's all like, oh, you guys left us, well, it's like, oh, well, you've got two teams in this game, and where everyone is leaving. So I don't think that this is going to be providing any sort of a betting angle with regards to just overall interest. What we're going to be seeing in college basketball is very fascinating, and I would love to see, like the old go Pac-10, if they can get back to the Pac-10, because that's what I grew up with like Isaiah Thomas being a bit that buzzer beater in the Pac-10 tournament. That's something that I am all here for, and hopefully they do a better job if they rebirth the Pac-12 network of being able to make sure that people here in the United States are able to access it, because apparently the access was better in other countries than the United States, but that's really the intrigue that's happening there. But I just don't think that this is anything that's really going to be impacting your handicapping. If you're right now breaking down games, if you're looking at these teams for the upcoming season, this should have absolutely no iota of difference whatsoever. But this might a little bit, as we did see Jeremiah Bembry. He was over at West Virginia last year. A former top 250 recruit was poised to play at Florida State, decided to go to West Virginia. Really didn't see any playing time whatsoever at West Virginia. Saw action in 8 games, came off the bench, and really didn't do a lot. He's going to be heading on over to Oakland, and we've noticed Oakland be able to take these guys from a power conference where they didn't see a lot of playing time and really be able to mesh them into their system. I think that it might be a little bit of a down year this year for Oakland, and quite frankly, I'm very surprised that they were able to do what they did last year, as they've lost pretty much 4 of their top 5 scorers from last year. DQ Cole is really the top guy returning from last year, as he was able to give the team a nice 8+ points per game a season ago. And they do bring in a few guys from mid-majors like Allen David and Becca Jr. comes in from UMKC, should be able to help out that defense. Jason Woodrich is someone that I liked while he was over at Cleveland State, a 6'7", a little bit of a combo player that's able to knock down some threes. He's able to give you a little bit of facilitation as well for his size. So do you think that that's going to be helping out? And you tell that this team was a little bit thinner in the backcourt, with now having to rely upon someone like a Jalen Jones to really be able to give this team some production. Jones is going to be coming in from Tennessee State, where he had a solid year, but I wouldn't consider him to be a guy that is going to be a top-flight guy out there in the Horizon League. So this should be able to help him out. Question is, what are you all going to be able to get out of him? Because it's sort of like Bigfoot with Bembry. We have heard a lot about him. We haven't necessarily seen him, but if there's one guy that's going to be able to unearth his full ability, that is going to be Greg Camp. He's going to be looking to probably play a little bit differently this year than in the 2023-24 season, where he was able to have a little bit more shooting on the roster. This year's team doesn't quite have as much of that, so going to be very fun to see what happens there. Personally, I had Oakland towards the middle of the conference for the Horizon League, and even with this addition, still have them towards the middle of the Horizon League. But a man that is always number one in my book in terms of doling out great insight, that would be Ryan McIntyre. Does great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. We're going to be talking about the Memphis situation, a little bit on the Pac-2 becoming the Pac-6, and we're going to be taking a look at some of these teams that might be able to elevate for this upcoming season. That's up next right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast Family Podcast. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Beast Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by this man, as we've got Ryan McIntyre aboard. He does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, taking a look at this great game of college basketball that we all know and love. He does the college experience over on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, taking a look at all things college basketball, and then additionally does a great job on the college football front. And for those that are fans of West Virginia sports, he does the Ryan and Rush Show, as he used to be an assistant over at West Virginia and South Carolina. And you're able to follow Ryan on Twitter/X at Moneyline_Mac, spelled MAC on Mac. And Ryan, it's always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
I appreciate you having me, Greg. November 4th is coming.
It certainly is coming. And what's also coming is more realignment to college sports, as we saw the reports come out on Thursday/very late Wednesday that the Pac-2 is now going to be becoming the Pac-6. Now, I maintain that in terms of the 2024-25 college basketball season, this is a big giant nothing burger. Well, I'm very excited to see what happens for the upcoming seasons when it comes to like 2026, 2027, which teams are going to be joining the Pac-6, whatever you want to call it, the six-pack, which I think is a great name, by the way, if they're able to roll with it. But just how do you take a look at things right now in college sports? Because I think that this could have an impact when it comes to the last year that these teams are within a conference, but we're still staring at a situation, in my opinion, where it's going to be 2+ years. I think that it should be business as usual for those remaining teams in the Pac-12 that are competing in the WCC, and vice versa. Those Mountain West teams are going to be moving in a few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, for maybe the ones that are leaving the Mountain West, it's a little bit of a downgrade with how great the Mountain West has been the last couple of years. San Diego State, of course, finally breaking through, getting that NCAA tournament success at the Mountain West. and that program have long tried to do. Colorado State and Boise State, though, have been knocking on the door the last couple of years. They've been making the NCAA tournament. So really looking forward to seeing how they translate into this new P2, Pac-6, whatever we're going to call it whenever we get to it. But for the meantime, I think it's business as usual in the Mountain West.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And before, when it was just Washington State and Oregon State, you could go with the 2-pack, which we remember there was a rapper back in the day that had that spelling. So just very interesting names, to say the least, and very fitting, because 6 is also the amount of people that were able to access the Pac-12 network over the last decade. So very fitting that we've got a lot there. So we got all of our jokes out of us. But one thing that is not a joking matter is what's happening right now with Memphis, the fact that they canned 4 staff members over the last week and a half or so. And I just want to get your perspective here, because you were on the staff over at South Carolina when they made that Final Four run. You're a part of Bob Huggins' staff over the last few years. Just how unprecedented is it what we're seeing with Memphis? And how do you think that that's going to be affecting the team? Because when you look at it on paper, all the major players are still there. You still have Penny Hardaway as the team's head coach, but this just, to me, feels like a really bad sign for Memphis that it's happening this late in the offseason.
Yeah, completely agree. You mentioned the Final Four year. Stuff like that definitely does not happen at Final Four programs. But, Greg, I think it's just a testament and kind of a reflection of what the Penny Hardaway era in Memphis has been. Yes, they've been talented. Yes, they win about 20 to 24 games every year, but you always feel like there's a little bit more and they underachieve a little bit. He only has one NCAA tournament win in his 6 years. That's less than Josh Pastner had when he was there. And they ran him out of town so quick, it was ridiculous. So I just think it's ridiculous, honestly. I know Stansberry gets a bad rap for his reputation, but I just think you can't have any continuity within your program when you're canning 4 guys around Labor Day. And I know there's been rumors that it may have already been in the works the whole summer. But even if it was in the middle of July, that is still way too late. You got to make these moves right after the season. And I do feel for these coaches as well, because they're not going to get another job. I mean, the season starts in less than 8 weeks.
Yep, I'm right there with you. It's just a strange situation in general. And when it comes to what has been happening over at Memphis, I think that you alluded to it very well. It just feels like they've done a little bit more with less, and it always feels like it's mental mistakes that is costing Memphis, and I always think that that's just a big reflection of coaching and just the power that can have in terms of affecting a team either to the positive or the negative, and in this case, very much so, in my opinion, to the negative.
Absolutely, and you think of really good programs like Houston and Iowa State, the way that they're led, it's like, hey, they're always going to get the most out of what they got. Memphis, you just think it's a complete opposite. It's like, hey, they have Final Four potential, but most likely they're going to be around a 64, or they may just be a top 10 team headed into February and then completely fall off the rails and not even make the tournament like last year. So it's kind of just a reflection of what the Penny Hardaway era has been. And unfortunately for Memphis fans, I don't think it's getting any better anytime soon. Yes, they'll be talented, but talent has never been the issue for Memphis.
Right there with you. With Memphis, they are recruiting at a higher level than they would if they got rid of Penny Hardaway. But as we know, what matters more is wins. You can have the most talented roster in the world, but if you get 0 wins versus having like 5 Greg Petersons and somehow, someway you get the Greg Petersons to be able to win games, you'd much rather have that roster, in my opinion. As joining me on the show, we do have Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And when it comes to the American, on paper, certainly Memphis is that top team. I don't think that there's any question about it when you bring in someone like a Musa Cisse, who's going to be in for a second go around with the program. You got Tyrese Hunter, guys like this. But how do you take a look at a conference where I do think that there are some talented teams that are a little bit under the radar, like a team that I keep coming back to is a UAB, that we're talking about the continuity not being there with the coaching staff for Memphis. Well, you've got a UAB team that brings back darn near everything from last year, and I think they're being slept upon, not just in the conference, but nationally.
Absolutely, and you talk about a team that gets more out of less. That's what Andy Kennedy's been able to do in his tenure. 4 years at UAB, he's got 100-plus wins. He had like 8 or 9 winning or 20-plus win seasons at Ole Miss. He's been really good there with 2 NCAA tournaments, UAB in the last couple of years. I think that they're honestly probably the front runner coming off last year's team as well. I think North Texas is another team. I know Coach Hodges, it was his first year. It was a transition from Graham McCaslin, but they have an identity, a chip on their shoulder as well. What Abdur Rahim was able to do at South Florida, he's really good in the portal. He proved that at Kennesaw in South Florida as well. And then two teams I think that are going to make big jumps here are Temple and Wichita State. We had Coach Fisher on our coaches series over there. They really turned it on there in that second half of February, where they got all the way to the AAC title game. They bring a bunch back. And I also like Wichita in year number 2 of the Paul Mills era to bring a bunch back. They were really young last year, and they got better throughout the year.
Oh, and I am so glad that you brought up Temple as well, because Temple is one of those teams that I always love taking a look at, that they were a bunch that they were able to surge late last season. They had everything go down the toilet bowl for them. They had the gambling scandal that went on, obviously, in that game against UAB. A lot of people remember that quite well, but how do you look at some of those teams that they got off to a rough start, and no doubt about it, Temple did, but they were able to build some momentum late? Maybe you had a guy that was averaging only 4 points per game, goes into a starting role, and then is putting up like 10 plus points, throwing out 3 assists per game, because those are always the teams I want to look at that maybe didn't make the NCAA tournament, but you could tell that they played a little bit better late. And even though they played better late, people sleep upon them because they didn't make that tournament run. Those are oftentimes the teams I find the most value with coming into a season.
And the team that kind of reminds me of that, it was early in the Shaka Smart era. Year 1 at VCU, they got better throughout the year. They went on, they won the CBI, and then year 2 they go to the Final Four. And I'm not saying Temple or Wichita State are going to go to the Final Four, but I think it's year 1. They took it on the chin a little bit in November, December, January, because they had a lot of youth, but they found their identity in February. They retained a bunch of their roster. Those are definitely the kind of teams that I love to pinpoint that I want to back early next year and often.
Yep, no doubt about it. I do think that a team like Temple is going to be one that's going to be so interesting. And I know your guy, Kobe, is an East Carolina alum. And I think that they're an interesting team as well in this conference, in that they've been a little bit ravaged by the transfer portal. No question, they're going to be losing quite a bit with Brandon Johnson no longer being in the program. But I look at this East Carolina team, and I do think that there might be a little bit of upside with them, with having a guy like an RJ Felton that could be, for lack of a better term, a do-it-all sort of guy. And they also bring in someone in Jordan Riley that we were just mentioning, that Temple team. He was a part of that team that was able to surge late last year.
Yeah, well, it was. And ECU, I think, is finally starting to get their guys. Coach Schwartz headed into year number 3. He's a Rick Barnes guy. So Rick Barnes is an older school guy, and I think that Mike Schwartz has kind of taken that, build it brick by brick rather than trying to get good real quick through the portal. I think he's built the culture. Their defensive system, I think, takes a couple of years for some of these guys, and they've been able to add guys in the portal like RJ Felton that I think they could take the next step.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that. As joining me on the show, we too have Ryan McIntyre, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, because in this day and age in college basketball, we expect everything to be microwave. We expect these teams to be either really, really good or really, really bad year 1, year 2, and that's just exactly what they are. But with some of these coaching changes, it does take a few years. You mentioned it with Schwartz. It really felt like they took a nice stride forward from year 1 to year 2, and even in year 1, you saw a few flashes of brilliance from that program as well. And I do think that those are some of the teams as well that could provide a little bit of upside, because I think that because we have seen a team like an Iowa State go from winning 2 games against SWAC competition a year earlier and then make the Sweet 16, that we get spoiled and think that it happens right away for some of these programs. But I still remember a day and age in college basketball where you gave a coach a full recruiting cycle. That's how you really gauge some of these guys. And there are still some of these programs that they're willing to stick a few years into these coaches like East Carolina. And those are some of the teams that as well, I think, get a little bit slept upon.
Absolutely, Greg. And just look at, for example, Dusty May at FAU. In his first 2 years, they were only, 34 and 32 or whatever it was. It took him 3-4 years to flip that roster over, took a couple portal classes and get his culture intact. And I know we get spoiled a little bit by the portal. Some guys like Jerome Tang or TJ Otzelberger have been able to flip it right away, and we think that's the norm, or Abdur Rahim at South Florida. But a lot of the time we see the other way, where year 2, you can fall in the portal like Dennis Gates did at Missouri. So I think you still have to find a way to build the culture, get guys in the program that know what to expect of the coaching staff, how to win in that league, grow old together, as they like to say at the mid-major, and then add a piece or two like free agency at the pro level via the portal.
Yep, I think that that's the best way of going about it. We have seen UConn be able to win national titles by utilizing that just very same mentality that you laid out and has been working for a lot of these teams that I've been able to build late in the ends that have been able to build just via that way over the last few seasons. And do want to get your thoughts as to what you're seeing coming into the upcoming season, because we've been laying out some of the things in general that we're looking for some of these teams that might be able to ascend this season. And I know you and Kobe are doing a great job with that coaches series. You guys have been able to interview a lot of these coaches. You just mentioned your interview with Adam Fisher, by the way, a very good one over there at Temple. But as you've been looking here in the off season since we last spoke a few weeks ago, is there a team or two that you just have been diving in a little bit more on, and either you're feeling a little bit more bearish on them or now you're feeling a little bit more bullish on them?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go right to a program that I think is one of the more underrated programs in terms of how loyal their fan base, and that's in the Conference USA with Coach Hank Plona in the Western Kentucky group. They bring back a ton from that NCAA tournament team. I believe like 8 out of their top 12 guys. And I know Steve Lutz went over to Oklahoma State, but they promoted within. They found a way to get hot late last year. They have a great home court advantage. They opened the season with Wichita here in a couple weeks, and I can't wait for that game in Bowling Green. I've been really bullish on them. Another team that, I think everybody's fallen in love with is McNeese State with Will Wade. The amount of investment that they put into that program, that 30-win season is not an outlier. That's going to be the expectation, in my opinion, down there in the Southland. And I can't wait for them to open up with South Dakota State here at the Pentagon on opening night, November 4th.
Oh, the Pentagon always provides some really fun games, and just feels like the shooter's eye is very good there as well, because a lot of those neutral courts, they always do seem to be a little bit more difficult for teams to be able to find some offense out there at the Pentagon. That's a really good shooting environment in general, and I do think that that leads into something very interesting as well, because we are going to see a lot of funky games when it comes to like Thanksgiving to begin the season as well. Just how do you take a look at some of those games that are going to be played on neutral courts? And I'll sometimes use air quotes with regards to neutral courts, because we saw and air quotes here, neutral court game out in the state of Washington when it was Gonzaga going up against UConn last year, which I find those to be hilarious. But I do think that it is interesting to gauge those sorts of environments, because as you know, a place like Maui, very much a shooter's haven. Meanwhile, when you go to like Barclays Center, for example, it feels like it's just a haven for unders.
Yeah, me personally, I hate the neutral site games. I love home court advantages. But yeah, you do make a good point. When it says neutral court, make sure you do your research. Don't just say, hey, it's a neutral court and hey, it's Kansas playing in Kansas City. It's going to be basically a Kansas home game. So I think you do make a good point on the unders, especially in those early day games in feast week where guys are a little bit sluggish, not used to playing in the middle of the day. It's a sleepy crowd. So unders usually do feast early in the season.
I'm right there with you. I've always been a stand for looking at a lot of those unders with regards to neutral courts, and a man that it doesn't matter whether he's at home on a neutral court or if he's away from home, he always gets the job done. That'd be you, Ryan. You and Kobe do a great job over on the College Experience over on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. You do a great job on so many fronts, Ryan. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
I appreciate it, Greg, as always. Go check us out over at the College Basketball Experience, and we're all on the big channel, the College Experience, where the college football experience can be found. We're breaking down all 364 teams, just like you, Greg. We're on conference preview, I think, 4 out of 31. So we're firing away just like yourself. And for all you West Virginia fans, go check out the Ryan and Rush Show, please.
And Ryan does a great job on that show, and every single time he joins this podcast, he lends such good insight. So big thanks to Ryan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is by Twitter /X timeline at @Jaden_D1. Keep in mind, letters DM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please just send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. We're down to 6 conference previews, so I'll be doing right around about 1 a week. Next one on tap is most likely going to be the ACC, unless if I unexpectedly find a guest within the next few days to do the American first, but we're probably going to be doing about 1 of these a week. We've covered all the low/mid majors. Now we're getting into the big boys, so be on the lookout for that, and I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season, off season, rain or shine, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.